Two words about the world we see, and naught but mine and thine they be. Ah, might we drive them forth and wide, with us should rest and peace abide. All free, naught owned of goods and gear, by men and women though it were common to all wheat and wine, over the seas and up the Rhine. No manslayer then the wide world o'er, when mine and thine are known no more. Yea, God, well counselled for our health, gave all this fleeting earthly wealth a common heritage to all, that men might feed them therewithal, and clothe their limbs and shoe their feet, and live a simple life and sweet. But now so rageth greediness, that each desireth nothing less than all the world, and all his own, and all for him, and him alone. Welcome, good evening, everybody. Today, our topic is one that I'm very excited about. I've been looking forward to it for many weeks. It is John Ruskin and William Morris, two of the most significant and influential figures of the 19th century and onwards. How did we come to this topic? Well, many of you will have watched my Tolkien streams that I'm very passionate about Tolkien. And I was looking into some of the origins of fantasy and the influences upon him. And one of the major ones was George MacDonald, the Christian writer of many fantasy stories, including The Princess and the Goblin. But one of the other major ones was William Morris. He wrote books such as The House of the Wolfings, which, if I give you a brief summary, it's Theodulf leads the Markmen to defend Mirkwood. Does that sound familiar to any Lord of the Rings fans out there? And so many of Morris's developments within fantasy, and he was one of the first to translate Norse sagas into English and Greek mythology as well. So this perked my interest, and I started reading him. But I came to realize that there were other similarities too with Morris and Tolkien. Tolkien spends a lot of time writing about the art of craft and the beauty of craftsmanship. And this was a theme important to Morris. We also have the fact that Tolkien was very strongly against industrialization and its damage to the environment and to the working man. And this is a theme that we find in Morris. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized, well, this isn't just Morris's view. He was influenced by John Ruskin. And that got me to thinking, well, why don't we have a stream exploring two of these really important figures who have a lot to say to us in the dissident, traditional, reactionary sphere? And with me to do that today, I have three, I'm including myself here, three experts on John Ruskin and William Morris. So without further ado, let me introduce them. So first, let me welcome to the channel Pharaoh. Hello, Pharaoh. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
And great to have you on.
Yeah, pleased to be here. And anyone who knows me knows that one must only mutter the word of Ruskin, and I will appear on your timeline, in your tweets, in your locale to defend that man's honor. So it was a pleasure to be able to have a chance to chat about his work and who he is. So thank you so much, and it's a really looking forward to the stream.
It's a real pleasure to have you on, and I know that you've defended Ruskin elsewhere as well. Could you just say a little bit for those who may not know you? I know you do a lot on Academic Agents channel, but could you say a bit about kind of your work on YouTube and the Twitter sphere and whatnot?
Sure. So I came to fame, so to speak, through Academic Agents cigar stream, originally focused on advertising, because my background's in advertising. However, I have a lot of interest in kind of cultural things, and so I'm kind of one of his key co-hosts for the Deepest Law, which is kind of cultural and I guess propagandic deep dives, basically. I've also got my own channel where I kind of more explicitly focus on art and art criticism. So if you haven't subscribed, please go and check it out. There's lots of interesting streams about different periods in art or different interesting discussion points. So yes.
I would really recommend the channel, and some of the deep dives are just fantastic. I was listening to you've got a 3-part series on symbolists, and I think they're all about 2 to 3 hours long. Just fantastic. You couldn't get that information elsewhere, with people who really love the subject as well. It was fantastic.
Yeah, so our co-hosts are Alexander Adams and Panama Hat, and obviously Alexander Adams, practicing artist, and he's very, very knowledgeable. But the symbolists are really interesting because they have, again, just totally been forgotten. There is a very specific. Okay, we often talk about progressive history. The idea of line go up, or this kind of march onward to success. Linear success. But there is an element of that in the artistic world as well, where it goes, 19th century is like academic art, then it's the PRB, then it's the Impressionists, then it's the Post-Impressionists, then it's Vorticists, Modernists, etc., Favoritists. There is like there is a narrative around how art has changed, where it starts out fussy and academic, and it ends up abstract basically in the 60s, and that's a good thing, and that's what it should be. But the symbolists basically don't work in that narrative because they are this weird disparate group, internationally, across time. And again, sort of looping this back to Ruskin actually was one of the first people to identify this group of people, certainly in England, before anyone thought about it. In his book, we'll maybe mention it, the Art of England, he tried to sum up the 19th century's artistic groups, and he describes it as the mythic school, which I think is pretty cool. And although I love the symbolists as well, I think the symbolist is good. Although there is confusion with the poetry group, which is very, very different. But of course, it includes kind of key figures like G.F. Watts, for example. Late Burne-Jones, you would say, is a symbolist as well. So it's very tied into what we're going to be talking about tonight as well. And I would say that Morris, at his best, has symbolist elements as well. So, but I will. That was the longest introduction of all time, so I'll let the other chaps have a chance.
No problem at all. No problem at all. And welcoming next, Plantagenet. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm great, thank you, and likewise, thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you on, Plantagenet. Could you say a little bit about yourself and your interests and your kind of presence online?
Sure. Well, mainly sort of a historian. I'm very much interested in English history, anything from sort of the prehistoric to the modern world. That's sort of where I focus on. I have also helped out with sort of organising some Skildings events as well. So if anybody hasn't seen that or heard about that, please check us out and come along to our next event. Aside from that, that's my main sort of spheres of focus in the online community.
What periods of history are you most interested in?
It'd have to be medieval or the early modern world, especially sort of the 11th and 12th century, with some of the monastic historians and chroniclers who detail many sort of great feats of heroic and religious sentiment as well.
Fantastic, and I think tying this back in with Morris and Ruskin, one of the things you find, I find especially with Morris, is this deep love of the medieval era, and this carrying across into his novels, his poetry, his fantasy writing, and it's little surprise then that somebody like Tolkien would end up enjoying Morris's stuff.
Definitely, there's so much in Morris's life where you can see him sort of looking back for inspiration and creativity from the truly aesthetic, aesthetically beautiful pieces that the medieval world did create. I think when he was a student, or just finished being a student actually, and he was living in the West End with Rossetti, he actually wove a medieval tapestry, and it was very much acclaimed by his friends for being a truly sort of beautiful piece of medieval art and recreating that spirit in its craftsmanship.
Wonderful, wonderful. And this nicely segues to our final guest, who's very aptly named for this discussion. Lady of Shalott, hello. Great to see
Oh,
you.
greetings and greetings to everyone in the chat. I've loved pre-Raphaelite art, the writing of Ruskin and Morris's creations for as long as I can remember. I first read The Nature of Gothic at university and went and sought out Ruskin's other work, lovely Old English lore, the work of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Mallory, Tolkien. Yeah, Gothic.
And
Love. I would be so happy just to live in a Gothic cathedral if they'd let me. Yeah,
that's the dream. One day.
yeah,
One
most
day.
definitely. One day, one day.
And you've just started a YouTube channel.
Yeah,
Right?
finally, it's something I've wanted to do for ages. And I've talked about, and life. I think with many of us, life just gets in the way. And I thought, oh, sod it. I'm just gonna get up there and put my thoughts on the screen, and if people like it, well, that's good. And if they don't, well, so what? So yeah, I've really enjoyed. I've just done a little video on Morris's work in South Australia, and the Gallery of South Australia holds the largest collection of Morris outside of Britain. And I was always intrigued as to why there was so much Morris work in Adelaide in South Australia, and it's basically that there were a group of very wealthy families who just were his biggest international clients, and they just bought up all his stuff and they furnished all their homes, literally, totally. I mean, one family called the Bar Smiths, who were a very, very wealthy family in Adelaide, at one point had 7 houses completely. These houses are like living museums, incredible. But fortunately, they donated many of the pieces to the Gallery of South Australia, so we can all go and see them. And it's amazing. The craftsmanship is stunning.
Well, it's fantastic. And your video of it, I recommend everybody go and watch, because you get to see these objects and these items as well.
Incredible,
So,
incredible. Particularly the tapestry, obviously, is just breathtaking. And to be able to get that close to a piece of art, it's wonderful.
well, thank you all for joining. And Ferro, I believe you've got some pictures to kind of set us off on our journey with John Ruskin.
Yes, let me just share my slides 1 second.
Okay. Whilst you're doing that, sorry, have you got them there?
Yes, yeah, they're all ready to go now. So if you add it
there you
across
go.
there, right? Can you see? Do you want to say your thing, Nathan, or shall I just kick off?
I wanted to start with a quotation from John Ruskin, because I thought it might set the mood for the kind of figure that we're dealing with, and relate him maybe to some of the themes that people will already know. This comes from his chapter in The Stones of Venice, The Nature of the Gothic. And he writes, "And observe, you are to put stern choice in this matter. You must either make a tool of the creature or make a man of him. You cannot make both. Men were not intended to work with the accuracy of tools, to be precise and perfect in all their actions. If you will have that precision out of them, and make their fingers measure degrees like cogwheels and their arms strike curves like compasses, you must unhumanize them. All the energy of their spirits must be given to make cogs and compasses of themselves. All their attention and strength must go to the accomplishment of the mean act." I feel this kind of spirit, this Carlylean spirit, that's what we're wrestling with. Is that right, Farrow?
Well, it certainly makes up one element of who he is, and I think Ruskin is one of the most underestimated and mischaracterized people from the 19th century. Whenever you encounter him today, it's either in connection to someone else or usually in a defamatory context. So, for example, most people will know of Ruskin from his connection to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, so I'm just going to call them the PRB from now on, just for the sake of brevity. And for example, one of my first interactions with him was there was a series called Desperate Romantics, which was a serialization of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And Ruskin, Yes,
for
yeah.
that series. Yeah,
Yes, featuring Aidan
for
Lewis.
Aidan Turner, and this was before
Aidan Turner.
Poldark.
Exactly. This is absolute, woman bait, putting him as
He's Rossetti.
as Rossetti. Yes, of course. But Ruskin has a strange sexual history, basically, and that's one of the things that's often associated with him, and that's one of the reasons why he's remembered, but also tied into the PRB, tied into Morris. But very few people, I find, actually go to Morris and hear what he has to say, because he is a real oddity again. He doesn't fit into any camp. Again, like you have to see him maybe as like an aesthetic Carlyle is how I would say. He is a total aberration in that day. Now, maybe before we even speak about him, I want to talk about some of the currents that are going on. In fact, let me just roll down the page a second. One second. There we go. So you can see he was born in 1819. Can you see this? Is that coming through?
It's just disappeared.
Okay.
It was there a second ago. There it is. It's there now.
Okay, sorry. I have to have the tab open there, but then I can't see everyone's faces. So born in 1819, and for those that know, this is kind of like the beginning of the Victorian age. I'm gonna lean on Plantagenet and ask him when was Victoria coronated? Is it like 36, something like that? No.
To my shame, I'm actually not too. I think it's 38 actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
38.
Close,
Okay.
close enough.
Yeah. There we go. So Morris, Ruskin, then dying in 1900, almost lives the same kind of life as Victoria herself. So he is the kind of archetypical Victorian character. Now, just in terms of, like I said, the currents that are going on in Britain at the time, the Victorian era marks the zenith of the power of British Empire. Even at the kind of early stages, you've got this kind of post-Napoleonic peace that goes on. You've got Britain consolidating the victory by massively boosting international trade. At the same time, you've got the Industrial Revolution, which does not happen at a specific point. You need to see it as waves occurring in different sectors and different periods. So by this stage, you've already got things like traction engines revolutionizing agriculture, etc. But during the Victorian period, you'll see the canal era, the railway era, the era of the power looms and the spinning jennies. These amazing and terrifying objects with novel names that fundamentally change the lives of people on a daily basis in ways that we've never in ways that we haven't seen for like thousands of years. Like maybe the Civil War was the similar kind of movement of people and class and society. And we've also got the kind of creation of the middle class, I would say, during the 19th century. The Victorians are obsessed with identifying and categorizing class. In the past, there was just the gentleman, there was just the nobility and the peasants, basically. There's essentially, but this new kind of wealthy middle class, the merchantmen coming into power and fame and fortune. From an aesthetic perspective, because I think it's super important to talk about that as well. Britain is very much has been a nobody on the European stage, right? Britain has always imported our artists. Think about Holbein, for example, in the court of Henry VIII. Think about Van Dyck in the court of Charles I. We imported our best artists. However, By the time that Ruskin is born, there is the first great literature and artistic movement in Britain that has a global effect, and that's the Romantic movement. So obviously you've got, and again, the Romantics, there is the literary element to it, but there is also the artistic element to it. Romanticism, I don't want to talk a huge amount on, but you need to understand that ideas of nature are at the center of Romanticism. The ideas of anti-industrialism is at the center. You mentioned, Nathan, that like Ruskin and Morris being we're the kind of pioneers of anti-industrialism. The real pioneer is, of course, William Blake. So for those who are familiar with Jerusalem, which was originally one of his poems, he talks about those dark satanic mills. You as a child in chapel every morning, singing those lines with everyone, I was forever perplexed as to the actual meaning, and of course, no one ever told me what they meant. But Blake very much meant them as a negative, that these mills were a blot on the landscape, poisoning nature itself. Blake was a very nutty chap in his personal life. I would say very, very eccentric, very interesting, but a brilliant artist at the same time. I want to talk about Romantic art just really quick, and I can actually talk about Morris. I'm sorry for this digression, but it's super important to understand where Ruskin is coming from. Romanticism is, in the artistic world, is basically fueled by like neoclassicism. Basically, the focus on the study of the body, the focus on the antique. So if you look at some of Blake's drawings, for example, you see these kind of bulging muscles, these not hyper-realistic, but a real attention is being paid to how the body is formed. If you go back 100 years in British schools, I'm not talking about the Van Dyke or the Holbeins, they treat the body as like a blob or as a whole. There isn't an attempt to understand it. That's one vein of Romantic art. The second vein is the imagination. Coleridge and Wordsworth, writing together in lyrical ballads, did a very famous preface talking about like where does creativity come from? Like as human beings, we come up with these ideas, but where does it derive from? What part of our brain? And lyrical ballads is Wordsworth's attempting to work out creativity. Coleridge actually has a massive fallout with him about it because he even though they published the book together, they fall out, and he says he has a separate go later as well. So, but the Romantics are actually kind of like aesthetic pioneers in the fact that they're thinking about art and art creation in a way that no one else has done before. Now, let's finally turn to Morris, to Ruskin. Sorry, I'm gonna do this throughout the night, so yeah, you're gonna have to just accept that I'm gonna mess that up. His father, John James Ruskin, was a sherry importer, very, very wealthy, very, very rich. I think he's Scottish as well.
Yeah.
His mother, Margaret Cott, was the daughter of a publican, and when you look at Ruskin, he is considered to be one of the classic high Tories, the last defender of the aristocracy. But he has a totally mercantile background, and I love that about him. When he went to university, he was considered to be like a gentleman commoner, not an aristocrat. Although he was, because he could pay the fee or whatever, he was considered to be the same level as the aristocrat. But he was very much part of this new wave of new wealth. Again, if you think about English aristocracy, the two big shake-ups I think are the Civil War, basically, or like maybe they're like Henry VIII and the Reformation. Lots of like commoners became nobles after during the Civil War, and then the Industrial Revolution, where basically rich merchants are buying their way into society. But what's interesting about those kind of societal buy-ins compared to today was that they, I guess they bought, like I said, they bought into the existing establishment. Consider it as a rotation of elites, so to speak. With today, our new elites hate the existing society and those people. So there's an interesting contrast there. Ruskin, by all rights, if he was, like a randomer today, he would maybe be a Dino, basically, while there he went through this process of transformation, ending up becoming even more. Do you see what I'm saying? You know how sometimes, like, when to fit in, people overcompensate.
It's
Ruskin,
almost proving it. You're trying to prove that you belong, and
100%.
in so doing, you're going way overboard to do it.
Yeah, I don't want to psychologize too much, because again, I think there's just so much. Everyone's obsessed with the psychology of Ruskin, and I just feel like, but I do think there's an element of that.
The convert is often the more zealous than the person
always.
raised in it, right?
Always.
You see that with religions and whatnot, right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I think that's true. The other thing that's worth mentioning is Margaret's evangelical faith. So, for those who don't know, if you think about the 18th and 19th century, the Church of England is very much a dead church, in my opinion. Again, I gotta say, I have to do a full disclaimer. I go to a Church of England church now, but my great grandfather was a Methodist minister, and he would appreciate me saying this. During this time, the church, it was stultified, it was dead, and so you've got figures like Wesley coming in. Wesley, who invented the Bible study, by the way, his kind of weekly midweek meetings to talk and discuss the Bible with a small group of friends. He very much revivifies, I think, the low church. There's this huge low church movement that goes on, and basically the Victorian revival is astounding. The Georgians are a very debauched and debased people, but the Victorians, I think, are very spiritual people, a very repentant people. For those who, again, maybe Nathan knows this from some of the kind of theological side of things, you've got someone like the Baptist minister Spurgeon going around to open air groups of people, thousands of people coming around to hear his sermons. You've got tents being erected and preachers talking. If anyone's familiar with Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
Yes, there's a scene in Tess of the D'Urbervilles where that takes place. Yeah,
exactly. So you have these kind of like roving bands of evangelical Christians and bringing people in. It's like as a Christian, I find it to be like an amazing special time. However, that fervor for Christ and Christian things was transplanted, I would say, from Margaret directly into John. We'll talk more about that in a bit. We've got John is a very smart guy as well, like amazingly so, annoyingly so. I hate looking at the past and seeing these kind of ridiculous, intelligent people. Went to University of Oxford, graduated with like double honours. They had to invent another honours for his year because of his scores or whatnot. Also, hugely important because of John James's connections on the continent. Obviously, he's a sherry and wine importer, whereas the best wine, France and Italy, and it's the perfect time to go to the continent as well. You've got the idea of, if people are familiar with the idea of the Grand Tour in the 18th century, the aristos would take a year off and travel around the greatest sites that continental Europe had to offer. Basically, would often end up in Rome. That's partly where Romanticism comes from. Is this rediscovering of ancient Rome through the Grand Tour? Ruskin wouldn't have been able to go on that. That's very much like an aristocratic level thing. It's like an entire entire thing. You see like Byron doing it basically or whatever. But he did go through on these tours of Europe where he went to Italy, went to France, went to Switzerland. Randomly, he has a big Swiss connection. He's like Switzerland's #1 supporter, basically. Also, heavy romantic influence. That's why I want to talk about that romantic stuff at the start. His early poetry was based on romantic poetry. The Romantics weren't actually that. It's an interesting story. They didn't immediately come to prominence in the way you think today. They were this kind of undercurrent, and Ruskin was kind of like a bit of a hipster picking up on it. He actually got to meet Wordsworth as well. I mean, that's pretty cool when you're at university. And a lot of Wordsworth's ideas are again focused on this kind of nature. The idea the Romantics believed about many different things, but that nature is one of the most virtuous things, basically the virtue of nature, or the ruins and stuff like that. Now, begins by doing these kind of minor poems, some early writings in some kind of architectural journals. That's not that interesting. His first major work is at 23. I just want to say this is his total work. This is the Ruskin library edition. I one day will have this. I'm just saying I've currently have this in like individual smaller books, basically, but 39 volumes, which beats Carlyle for the sheer raw output of work. He lived a long life and wrote a lot of stuff in a lot of places.
Were most of these in magazines, or were they kind of full books, or is it a mixture?
I would say like a third in books, a third in magazines, and then a third are lectures and external events that were then written down. Okay, I have attempted to summarize the 4 periods of Ruskin and group some of his famous and greater works together, right? A lot of people come up to me and say, how do I start reading Ruskin? And I've got to be honest with you, you basically don't. You have to like, okay, Ruskin is not a continental philosopher. He does not list out his ideas in a nice, lovely checkpoint and expand upon them in a logical way. Reading Ruskin is kind of like, asking your granddad about his garden and then learning some deeper truths about life itself as he tells you about, the life cycle of a plant or something like that. It's that kind of, his knowledge is always abstract. It's always kind of like veers from one place to the other, but he is an exceptionally original thinker as he kind of goes through stuff. So, are you going to say something, Plantagenet?
No, I wasn't. But I very much agree with the statement. I was reading the introduction to the 7 Lamps of Architecture, and he was weaving in points about human action, about the nature of art, and obedience to God, and human action, all into about 15 pages of reading, which is a wonderful experience.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that the first section here are his biggest works, the works he's most well known for at the same time. Modern Painters. It's not one book, it becomes 5 books. He starts off at the tender age of 24 with his defense of Turner.
Yeah.
So I mentioned at the time, the Romantics are a big movement. You've also got there's a bit of like a guild-esque cartel in the form of the Royal Academy. If you're familiar with Reynolds, he's the first president of the Royal Academy. The Royal Academy's been running for like it must be like 40 years, and I would say it has a stranglehold on art. It's kind of like
absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Ruskin really took an assault on Sir Joshua Reynolds, and his discourses really prevailed at the Royal Academy, and he set the rules by which art was practiced and criticised, and Ruskin had just had enough of that. Yeah.
And the PRB as well, the Pre-Raphaelites, again, act as this kind of anti-academics, almost secessionist force in the kind of marketplace. But basically, Modern Painters he just really likes Turner. No one else knows who Turner is, but because Ruskin's able to buy paintings and he knows about things. He starts off his life as an art critic, but Modern Painters very much evolves into this kind of 5-volume epic. It takes forever to finish all five volumes, but it covers a plethora of matters. For me, I think my favourite Modern Painters book is Modern Painters 2, where he attempts to create a philosophy of beauty. And again, I mean, I could talk for hours on this, so I'll try and hold myself back. But essentially, this is why I think Ruskin's underrated. I think he is England's greatest aesthetic philosopher. The other major figure would be Burke, for example. Burke's treatise on the sublime and the beautiful, where he's trying to work out. I'll just quickly mention this a second, Nathan. Sorry, it's a slight digression, but I think it's again important about understanding how we think about art and beauty. People may have heard me speak about this on Lander's channel the other day, so apologies if you did. When you look at a beautiful woman, it's undeniable that she's beautiful. You speak to lots of guy friends and lady friends, and they'll say, "Okay, that's a beautiful woman." But when you turn to a mountain, many people will say that a mountain is beautiful as well. Now, question for you: how can someone that is small, that is soft, that is smooth? This is Burke's words, not mine. I'd just like to say, be beautiful. But then, how can something that's large, epic, eternal, be beautiful as well? Doesn't make any sense. Beauty has to be categorized. Well, how do we answer the question of different things being beautiful that are observed in the natural world that are fundamentally different? Right? Burke's answer is to subdivide them. He says some things are beautiful, some things are what I'm going to call sublime. He sort of like separates out these items, and that's how he categorizes it. Now, Ruskin, in his book 2 of Modern Painters, basically flips it on its head, and you got to understand that all of Ruskin's works are heavily viewed through the Christian lens as well. Like someone like Burke, like he's like a nominal Christian, wouldn't talk about Christianity in his work at all. It doesn't really affect it. Ruskin constantly talks about Christianity and views the world in a very, very biblical way. And he is also a bit of a Bible scholar as well. His mum made him read the Bible like several times as a child, basically. And what he effectively says is, God is beauty. Interestingly, there's a psalm saying, God is beautiful, for example, beautiful God. So Ruskin's saying, look, God has all of those features in a similar way to Jesus being described as the lion and the lamb. These are two impossible things to fit together, but he is both of them. God is both the mountain and the beautiful woman or the beautiful man at the same time. The perfect form. And he comes up with a new categorization for beauty, where he lists out what he thinks are the 7 archetypes of beauty based on that. So, I mean, he's only like 26 when he writes it. I mean, most philosophers would like get to like 50 and then try and take on, like, again, beauty is like one of those things, Nathan, that if you want a 3-hour-long discussion, go to artists and like start talking about what they think beauty is. Basically, it's like the eternal annoying question. I basically don't talk about it typically because it's just so frustrating. But he takes it on at 25, rightly or wrongly. His book 2 isn't that well known about or that well picked up, but I think it does significantly show how he's trying to think about the world as this like top. It's like a top-down view. So it's like God brings everything down. It's in the form of nature, and we can observe nature. It's kind of like seeing fragments of God. Think of it a bit like that.
It's very much the medieval conception of nature and God's relation to nature.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and of course, yeah. I mean, he's a medievalist. I'm not sure like how much he picks up like what he's reading from a medieval perspective. But I think you got to understand his education at Oxford would cover, like, I imagine, a series of medieval texts. Okay, his first really big work that, like, the Turner thing was like a big. It got Turner on the map for sure.
Well, he
Didn't
did,
really
but
get-
he also, sorry, just to interrupt, he
Yeah.
also got a bit of a backlash, which also
Yeah.
inadvertently promoted the book, because some critics accused him of idolizing Turner, because he pretty much put Turner straight into the canon with Raphael and Leonardo, when some people just thought that was just unacceptable.
And again, I think there is an argument to say that they were, they were right in the fact that.
Ferro, are you still there?
So can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You cut out for a second there. Hopefully he'll be back in a moment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear
Yep.
you loud and clear.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know where I got to with my rant, but
we were just saying about the backlash to the book, that some people thought that he had over promoted Turner because he put him straight into the canon.
Yeah,
with Leonardo and Raphael, and some other critics felt that was unacceptable. But equally, a lot of contemporary writers, I mean, you had a lot of support from George Eliot, Charlotte Bronte, Mrs. Gaskell, Tennyson, all thought this was a really serious new book.
Yeah, that's true. I would describe it as kind of like the critic's choice or something like that. It was capturing something of the popular zeitgeist, but again, the more establishment-esque figures didn't really like it. So he's still not like a national name at this point. His big breakthrough work was The Seven Lamps, which his discourse on architecture, where he's trying to understand what is architecture, what is an architect, what are, again, the 7 archetypical types of or features of all good architecture, basically. And he highlights 7 different buildings, each which represent that kind of archetypical strength. This is very much derived from his approach of book 2 of modern painters around this philosophy of beauty again, where he's trying to identify these different transcendent features that exist in all brilliant buildings. Seven lamps. I'm trying to remember what all of the lamps are. I can't remember.
I have them to hand in my notes.
Okay.
Actually.
Yeah. Please do.
So yes, of course. The lamps of sacrifice, beauty, power, obedience, truth, life, and memory.
And again, this is just like classic Ruskin. This is so obscured. What does sacrifice have to do with the building? One person may say. And then you read the book and you're like, oh yeah, this makes total sense to me. What he means by sacrifice is that the creation of all buildings, in some ways, is a sacrifice, especially ecclesiastical buildings, in the form of, we're giving up time and resources to praise God through the practice of building, right? Okay, and actually, like spending more money on the materials for the building is a greater sacrifice. So actually thinking about the materials of the building and doing the best we can for our age is fundamentally important, basically. And again, this is, maybe I should have mentioned this at the start again. Like the age they're in, this is the rise of liberalism. This is the rise of the Economist. How does Carlyle call them again, Nathan? The dull science or something, is it?
The dull science. The dismal science of the bean counter.
Yeah, exactly.
Nexus.
These horrible little bean counters would have us build in the cheapest materials possible. And Ruskin, he says no. He says you should build it in the most expensive materials you can do, because you're sacrificing to God there. And again, it's such a counter-liberal idea. And if you're reading this, you'll be like, what is this guy going on about? Because it's so against our modern age. Our modern age is just like Like, it was bad then, but at least those bean counters had taste. Now, like, we are just like squished into these just like horrific buildings where it's just about the cheapness of materials, how efficiently can we store human beings. You know, you see this with modern churches. When was the last great church that was created in England? You know, maybe Coventry Cathedral, and even then I would say that that's not that great a building. You know, maybe I would say maybe the Liverpool Cathedral in the 40s or whatever. You know, we've forgotten what it is to build itself. Sorry to do a Ruskin-esque sub rant, but that's what we learn in the Seven Lamps. Okay.
I think there's just a point there I'd want to kind of zero in on.
Yeah.
Is that I think throughout his work, one of the insights that he has is, and you've kind of touched on it, we have this utility view of what all that matters is what's produced at the end, and how quickly we can do it, how cheaply, and, you know, hopefully the quality is decent, but we'll do it as quick and cheap as possible. But his great insight is not just the end result which matters, it's the process itself which is important and has an effect upon those who are building or making, as well as the customer as well. And so it's that whole,
Definitely, yeah.
it's a very, it's noticing how the process impacts us, not just the result of the process.
Completely. You just said, you just need to look at the art and architecture of an age, and that will tell you all you need to know about that age. And just look at the London skyline right now. That will tell you everything you need to know. You'll see a beautiful building by Sir Christopher Wren, and right beside it there'll be some monstrosity in steel and glass, and that says it all.
And
What were you gonna say? Yeah.
by doing so, Ruskin is very much drawing on Carlyle, at least Carlyle's conception of whatever sort of the spirit, the energies, and the values that go into all worldly action that will ultimately shape that action. And as such, by adhering to at least Ruskin's seven lamps, these virtues can ultimately guide us towards, you know, more beautiful and more sort of architecture that will actually stand the test of time and the test of life itself.
Yeah, exactly. Just, I mean, there's loads to unpack there. Just quickly, one thing I forgot to mention is his relationship with Carlyle. He was constantly writing letters to them. In his later years, he literally called him father. A little bit creepy, but kind of sweet at the same time. So Carlyle's ideas definitely like massively resonate, but Ruskin always sees it through the Christian lens, while Carlyle does not, and I think that's one key differentiation between them. And secondly, Ruskin, because of his focus on the aesthetic, like most of the stuff he talks about, certainly in the early period, is around aesthetic philosophy, essentially. Like, Carlyle doesn't write about it at all. So it's kind of like, think of Ruskin as kind of like, what if Carlyle were to write 4 treatises on like what's art like today and how should we be, like what's creativity, etc., etc. Okay, I'm gonna speed up because we're running out of time. Stones of Venice was his big work. This kind of put him on the international map. It's like Seven Lamps made him like famous like across the country. It is a 3-volume epic, talking about the architecture of Venice. Like, why is this boring history of you know, a perfectly lovely Italian city, you know, why was it so well received? Well, the book is divided essentially into several stages, several historical stages, where he kind of goes through the different eras of Venice, from Byzantine to Romanticism to Gothic, and then to classical as well, I think he mentions. But firstly, this is really kind of like a love letter to Venetian Gothic, which he believes is the kind of most beautiful form of Gothic already. And again, one of the other kind of undercurrents of the Victorian age is the Gothic revival. And when you think about Gothic revivalism, you've got to think of, obviously, Pugin, Houses of Parliament. Pugin is driving from this Anglo-Catholic, we must recreate perpendicular Gothic everywhere exactly as it is. Like, Pugin is weirdly puritanical about his approach to Gothic, which is to basically say Gothic was the best art form. He's like a proper returner. We must return to Gothic in exactly the same way. For Ruskin, yes, he does love Venetian Gothic and thinks it's very beautiful, but he's more interested, again, just like understanding, like, well, wait a second, what makes the Gothic era Gothic? You know, why do we do things? And of course, it is it's been mentioned on the stream by Charlotte already. Book 5 of Volume 2, Stones of Venice, The Nature of Gothic, was hugely important for understanding not only where does this Gothicness come from, what is Gothicness, but also about the nature of man. So I'll just talk about the first part a second, because what Ruskin tries to say is, when we talk about architectural periods, we're always like looking at the end, looking at it from the end process, and then trying to dissect it. And what happens is we end up saying, okay, what is Gothicness? Oh, it's the Gothic arch, of course. And then some other guy says, no, it's the flying buttress. That's what it is to be Gothic. And Ruskin says, no, what it is to be Gothic is to be a medieval peasant in a certain mindset at a certain time. And that's what it is to be Gothic. And I think that this understanding of aesthetics as a form of naturalism, a form of temporal, it's of a certain time, and also the genetic element as well, which is really interesting, where he divides up the Germanic peoples, the cold, who are reflecting their cold environment in the north, versus the louche Mediterraneans with their sunny flat roofs. You know, what he fundamentally points out is Northern Europe is colder. You need to have gable roofs, right? For those who don't know, in the architecture trade, it's the pointy roofs, because we like, the further north you go, the pointier your roof must be. If you look at houses in the Greek islands, for example, all flat roofs. If you go to the Levant, everything's got a flat roof because there's no rainfall. They don't need that. They need, like, it's more about heat reduction. So the Northern European mindset is already about pointing up to the sky, about going to the infinite. Does this sound familiar to anyone at all? You know, there would not be a Spengler if there was not a Ruskin. I'm 100% sure, because he's the first person to tie in both race and location into ideas of aesthetics, and that's what Spengler basically does as well with his identification of the Faustian group is massively derived from Ruskin's exploration of the Gothic. Not that he would, I mean, Spengler hates Anglos, so he would never say that he was influenced by Ruskin, but it's obvious. Toynbee is more explicit about it, interestingly. Toynbee sort of references a few little Ruskin points.
He also wrote Ruskin's Morris as well, I believe.
Say again, sorry?
Toynbee also references Morris as well, I think, in his book on the 19th century and the industrialization of England. Okay,
that's interesting, yeah. So just kind of going back to Ruskin, I think he is this kind of this kind of pioneer of aesthetic ideas, in the same way that the Romantics broke new ground with new ways of thinking about how do humans create things and who are we. He does the same, but at the same time, I think influenced by Carlyle, he starts to include some anti-industrial ideas, but it's tied into his aesthetics as well. Do you see what I'm saying? It all comes from, it's God, into nature, into aesthetics, and then into practice. Honesty of materials means honesty of man as well, you know. And so in the nature of Gothic, you have his first proper attack on the Industrial Revolution. And Nathan, that's a great quote from it. So yeah, thank you so much. But I would, again, it's a really hard read. If you go and read The Nature of Gothic, I would recommend doing it. But there are, like I said, you're going to have to accept that you're going to be reading about like random Gothic stuff for a while to get to that specific piece. But it all sort of ties in together. But there is a payoff where it's kind of like, wow, that like blew my mind. The fundamental point is he's saying human beings are not perfect. We cannot create perfect things, and trying to make them perfect is a bad idea. What we need to do is to think like the Gothic mindset, to understand that because again, this time his whole rant comes off the back of the fact that individual sculptors in Gothic cathedrals would have the flexibility to create whatever they wanted. Basically, like there would be like a master builder who would have their overall design, but all of the different bosses and little sculptural elements that they would have autonomy to do that at the same time. And it's
I think Ruskin, sorry to interrupt, I think Ruskin calls it the quality of imperfection, that things did not have to be exact. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. He also summarizes it with the word rudeness, which I love.
Rudeness.
We need to reclaim rudeness to mean roughness. I think it's so much better. And anyway, this chapter was, I mean, the book was a big success because it's actually a really interesting read. Like, if you want to learn about architecture, just read The Stones of Venice, and you will basically, that will get you up to speed because he takes you through all of those different periods. But the Nature of Gothic, hugely influential. So obviously, in the architectural world, for the next 10 years, everyone starts like building Venetian Gothic. Basically, it's really funny. I should have had some more pictures in here, but whenever you see kind of like polychrome Gothic arches, that's a Ruskin inspired building. Basically, polychrome is when you've got like a red brick and a black brick, or like a red brick and a white brick, or if there's an OG arch, which is kind of like a point and a counterpoint. It's kind of like an S shape on both sides. Those are the kind of classic Venetian style buildings. So has that huge impact, but more importantly, it influences a generation of artists. Now, the PRB doesn't specifically mention Ruskin initially, but Holman Hunt, in his biography, so two-volume biography of his life, says that he did read Stones before the PRB got together, and I consider Holman Hunt to be the intellectual driving force of the PRB. So
yes,
I think
definitely.
The other at this time, so basically Ruskin sort of blows up, mega wealthy, mega well respected. He's the darling of society at this point, and he sticks his neck out and actually advocates for the PRB at this point as well. And again, they don't have the instant success that comes from it, but he basically helps them on their way, and because of that, changes, I would say, the course of all art, basically for the next 200 years. Sorry.
I was just going to say, is it worth just bringing in just a further point on his attacks on the division of labor within the Stones of Venice? Because I think that's another key aspect of his argument. Essentially, the idea that the imperfect beauty, you're getting the craftsman implementing his own design, and through that is the creation of variety. Whereas in the division of labor, you have one person making the design, another person bringing it to fruition, trying to get a perfect finish on it or standard form, thus robbing both of the pleasure and robbing the opportunity of the creation of true beauty in the process.
Yeah, and the way I put it today is, in the Victorian period, there were
Pharaoh, we've lost you, I'm afraid. Lady of Shalott, were you going to come in there?
Oh, yeah, I would just say that Ruskin really is saying that the workers of the Middle Ages who built the Gothic cathedrals were working with a kind of freedom that the Victorian worker does not have, and that then is reflected in the work. And as you say, that awful division of labor, you lose that. And Ruskin pointed out that any Gothic type architecture created in an industrialized society will be inauthentic. It cannot be true.
Hi,
So
sorry.
he's totally against that division of labor. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
We can hear you again. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, they keep trying to shut me down, Nathan. They know I'm
It's the Royal Academy.
To you.
Yeah, exactly.
To Joshua Reynolds from the grave. That's
Yeah.
it.
I love Reynolds, by the way, but yeah, I just like to say, just on the So what I like to think is today is in Victorian London there was 1,000 carpenters that you can go to, and you could get a chair made in a plethora of different ways, and each one would have the mark of its maker. Now, 1,000 people will go to IKEA and get exactly the same chair, which is slightly cheaper. And even, I got to be honest with you, I don't think it's much cheaper when you do the calculations of the price of furniture, or like for Morris's chairs compared to today. It is not cheap. It is not much cheaper to get to IKEA. I genuinely think people need if we need like a team of autists to do some of these kind of cost calculations, because I'm 100% sure that the promise of cheaper products is a total lie. The only things that are cheaper are TVs and laptops. Like the useless things are cheaper, but the important things like chairs. The chair is more important than a laptop in my household, in my opinion. Has more transcendent power. That is actually not much cheaper and substantially worse. So, Nathan, I don't know if we're past an hour now. Maybe I'll just quickly talk through the rest of his plethora, but and then we can maybe go to Morris, because actually that's quite finishing on Stones is quite a good idea. He has three other other kind of periods, if that makes sense. I would say post Stones, he's got so much money basically. So he I would say does a lot of like just general art criticism. He starts to get into like fairy stories, etc. And he actually wrote a fairy story for his first wife, Effie, that he then publishes later. But he's also interested in educating people, which is quite funny because his views on education is basically like, don't educate the plebs, basically, or like his best line is the purpose of education is to filter people or to sift people, which I think is actually very interesting. You know, we see education as a transformational experience, but Ruskin sees people being the same. You know, we think we can. So okay, in today's society, we think we can turn everyone into office workers, right? Just by sending them off to university. Ruskin says no. There is a certain number of creative people in England. You're going to either use them or you're going to lose them. You've got to find out who those creative people are and turn them into artists and to support them. Otherwise, you're going to miss out those people. There are people who are just going to be labourers their entire life. That's what they were born for. This is where some of the Calvinistic Christian spirits coming in. But I think that's just such an interesting way of thinking about education. You know, we think we can turn this nation into a nation of office workers. It is not possible. We're putting people who should not be in an office space in an office space. There should be routes and avenues for those who want to work with their hands and who should be craftsmen and tradespeople. And modern society has fundamentally not been able to connect with creative people. We are living in the least creative time ever. Literally, cavemen were more creative than the age we are in right now. You know, we are just rehashing the past over and over again endlessly.
Well, that's the best demonstration. Is if you could go to the cinema or listen to music, it's all just copies of what was done in the 90s or earlier, essentially.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So he does do this kind of like education thing, elements of drawing. If you're interested in getting into art, I would highly recommend that book. It's a really good starter. And again, he is constantly encouraging people to get into art. This is kind of like I would say is kind of like I need to find something to do after Stones, basically. Right, his third period, he starts to write Flaws I can never say this properly. Clavirgia, which is this is a periodical lectures, and again, this is where he starts to kind of sharpen his teeth against the economists quite pointedly here. He also drops a series of really important lectures, again returning to art philosophy, specific fullness of art. Again, is utterly sublime. Like, what is the purpose of art? Why do we do it?
Ferry, you've disappeared once more, I'm afraid.
Oh my goodness! Literally.
Oh, I've got you now.
Yeah, sorry. His Oxford lectures were on the uses of art, because we never asked that question. Why do we create art in a society? Is it art for art's sake? He says no. We need to do it for transcendent purposes. Specifically, like, how do we understand what heroism is? How do we make heroes? Now, what he says, he returns to Plato. He's very, very into Platonic philosophy, and Plato was against the epic poets. He was against Homer because of their influence that they had over the people. But what Ruskin says, okay, look, Homer teaches you how to live this heroic life. You read Achilles' life, you read Odysseus's life, and that's what art has the power to do, is to transfer ideas of being and belonging through media and through work. Art shouldn't just be created because it should be created. Again, this is the great malaise of our age, is we have 1,000 artists producing useless things for nothing, or even worse, you have these activist artists producing works for debased causes, but you have no one creating art to show what it's like to be a hero, or to be a great man, or to be a devout man. This is it's fascinating and so pertinent to our age. Thirdly, he creates his Guild of St. George, which is his attempt of reviving the medieval guild system. Whenever you hear about, oh yeah, Evoler's so cool, he's like, yeah, we need to bring back the guild system. Ruskin was talking about that literally 70 years before Evoler did, and he actually created a guild. Now, I would say the guild itself, total failure. It's really fascinating. And again, both Morris and Ruskin totally failed in their objectives of, in Morris's case, bringing back traditional crafts, and in Ruskin's case, bringing back the guild system. And we need to look at why that happened, because imagine we were in charge of society. We could do stuff like this. We could bring in Evoler's guild system or whatever. It's not going to work when the rest of modernity is like how it is. So interesting questions about there. His last stage, basically following the infamous Whistler trials, which is basically, he writes this scathing attack on a late Victorian artist called Whistler, with one of his nocturnes, which is an abstract piece about fireworks. And if you see the piece, I think it is a very beautiful piece of artwork. But it's Ruskin's point is that Whistler would spend 6 months creating a beautiful art piece and charge 10 guineas for it. He spent 1 day creating that nocturne and charged exactly the same amount of cash for that piece. And because of that, he called him I can't remember the exact insult. It was a brilliant Victorianism.
Yeah, it's worth saying the Whistler case really damaged Ruskin's reputation. It ruined Whistler, bankrupted him, and Whistler ended up, I think, with a farthing in damages. But it really damaged Ruskin's reputation, and Ruskin just couldn't get Whistler at all, could he? He just didn't get it.
No, it's not about. I just totally disagree with this. Okay, here's the thing. This is again part of the anti-Ruskin myth. Is this whole Whistler event? Yeah. Whistler was not bankrupted by this. Whistler went on to have a very successful art career after that. But I tell you what, he never painted like that again. Now, here's the question: what is the purpose of a critic? Should he be able to say anything about any artwork, because
yeah.
what Whistler was saying is that it was libelous. You're slagging off my piece of art, and because you're so prestigious, no one's going to buy it at all. You know, the point of a critic is to tell the truth, you know, fundamentally, and he's got to speak his mind. I'm 100% behind Ruskin's position, and again, you can judge the art. I think the art piece is very beautiful. Whether
Yeah.
it was worth 10 guineas at that time, I don't think it was. But I still think the art. Still think the art was interesting, and it had value. But fundamentally,
because I sorry, Ginger, I just really wondered what you thought about that, because it's been used against Ruskin to really damage his reputation, and I've read so many different accounts of that case that I was just interested what you thought of it. Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to do a video about it one day, because Whistler literally writes like an entire little mini book afterwards, just laughing at the whole situation, just saying it was like a big joke, and he was just like he was like being a massive troll about it.
Yeah.
The thing is, Whistler, he's coming from this. They call them the aesthetic movement. These are the Wildian art for art's sake people. It's a fundamental attack on higher ideals of the purpose of art. You know, so Ruskin is his arch nemesis. But I won't go into too much longer. But fundamentally, it broke the man. It broke his reputation. It broke like he literally withdrew from life at that point, and he was very old by that. He was pretty old by that state as well. So he spends very much the last of his last period reflecting and kind of just reminiscing. Praeterea is his own like autobiography. You got things like The Art of England, which is like I would say a mediocre piece summarizing the art of England, and then things like The Pleasures of England, which is this kind of like slightly sickly sweet view on England itself. But this is just like I think there's 39 volumes, like I mentioned. This is obviously like less than a third of what's in there. With Inside Fours, there's over like 12 different lectures as well. If you want to understand Ruskin, I'll finish off with basically start off with Stones, read the whole of that. Then I would read Seven Lamps. Then I would go to his lecture series. With, again, I always recommend Traffic, because there's just, again, it's just a brilliant piece with lots of little bits of insight, etc. I won't talk anymore, Nathan, because otherwise it'll just be the Pharaoh show. But I hope that's given people an idea as to the kind of breadth of work that he's doing. People just call him an art critic. I describe him first as an aesthetic philosopher. I describe him second as an artist. We haven't even talked about the artwork that he does. Even Alexander Adams, much to my chagrin, calls him, he's an excellent amateur artist. It really annoys me. He is an artist in his own right. He could paint better than most people today. And he is a critic as well. And there's been some of his certainly building critiques are fantastic, but the impact that he had from a cultural perspective is huge. You know, like I said, he's changing how people build things. He's changing how they think about things. From a philosophical perspective, I would say very little impact until now, and I think now is the time to dig into his aesthetic philosophy ideas, and again his he has some of the best cases against ideas of utilitarianism and political economy that are out there. Again, Carlyle's great. I love Carlyle. But he's just kind of like, oh yeah, like economists are bad. Okay, you know, it's just like he never gives you a solution, or never really gives you an argument. Ruskin will just tell you that this is why it's stupid. This is why it's stupid. You haven't thought about this. And so I genuinely think there's a lot to be mined out in his hors d'oeuvre. But I'll finish there.
Well, thank you so much, Farah. That was a really great introduction to Ruskin, and I totally can concur with that last point, because you know, today a lot of people will talk about humanity being reduced to an economic unit, mainly to produce and consume, being a cog in the machine. Ruskin was already talking about this and using that language back in the 19th century in a way that's quite unique. And so, yeah, I think that, and he's already saying a lot of what like Jacques Ellul will try to say much later. So I definitely recommend everybody go and go and read Ruskin when you get the chance. Sorry, go ahead, Ferro.
No, I was just going to say, but like I said, just prepare yourself. It is not. You got to see him. It's like, okay, it's like going to church. If you've ever been to an old school Baptist church, and you have a hellfire preacher at the front, just shouting down at you, that's kind of like what the experience is like. But you just got to like just hang on in there, and you'll get to the gold. Is all I'll say in time.
Definitely. I mean, it's like Carlyle in that respect too, I think. You read Carlyle and it's not, he doesn't have like a clear bullet point list of points. It's you've got to read the whole thing and search for the gold. But I guess now would be a good time to move to William Morris, and I would like to invite Plantagenet and Lady of Shalott to kind of lead us in this discussion, because I appreciate you both both have a knowledge of Morris. So where would you both like to begin?
Oh gosh, well, I suppose you just begin at the beginning. He was born in 1834. His family had some shares in tin and copper mining in Devon and Cornwall, which increased massively in value. So he became pretty rich. Yeah, became really rich. And of course, he went off to Oxford, and that's where he met Edward Burne-Jones. So he fell into that group. Burne-Jones then introduced him to Rossetti. Sorry, Plantagenet.
I was going to say, and at Oxford, they very much became enthralled in the Arthurian legend, and they actually painted, I think, the
frescoes.
common room.
They painted the frescoes
in the Oxford common room.
That's right. They were really involved in that, and they also had, well, Morris had the financial means to subsidize them to tour the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, which not everybody was able to do in those days, and that made a huge impression on Morris. Obviously, came back, and his parents had wanted him to go into the clergy, which he didn't want to do, and he ended up working for a while in an architectural office. He was already friends with Philip Webb, the architect, and that they were massively influenced, of course, by Ruskin. They'd read The Nature of Gothic, which Morris felt was the most influential thing that he had ever read.
And Morris was also very influential at spreading Ruskin's ideas within the Raphaelite group themselves when they were at Oxford.
Very much so. So he really just fell into the right group of people, and he had a bit more money than most of them, so he was able to help them out financially and patronize them. And it's always useful to have a friend with means. So he really fell into that correct group. His parents would have liked him to go into the church, but he didn't want to.
Can I just interrupt and say, like, this whole kind of like the Morris angle is super important for today as well. And again, like, if anyone's listening right now, and then you think, I'm not an artistic person, I'm not creative, how can I help? Create an art, help an art movement. All you need to do is just like buy stuff. That's literally, before the video, I commented that Nathan had bought one of Sam Wilde's like prints at the back across here, and it's just as simple as just patronizing artists that we know are good and on our side. That's all we need to do to contribute. So you don't need to be a great artist. You just need to help out like Morris did. So
most definitely. I mean, it was really when he merged with the PRB that he evolved his unique design style, which was very organic. And we're talking about a time when artificial colors were being promoted in design and manufacture. He was famously would walk around with his hands blue for days because he was trying manually to get the right shade of blue for his creations. He was very, very into drawing back to nature is key, nature and medievalism and authenticity. I don't know if Plantagenet wants to come in and say anything about Morris at this point.
Well, in terms of drawing medievalism and sort of the traditional dyes and practices, yes. Firstly, he actually experimented quite a lot with sort of modern chemically concocted dyes and found them all completely unsatisfactory to what he was aiming for. Instead he turned to sort of more traditional methods and traditional dyes, and only sort of sought the best quality ones possible, so that he could truly produce wonderful works of art. And he very much emphasized the need for sort of stylized depictions of nature that weren't really abstractions, but sort of showed the meaning and the beauty of the patterns and of the plants and fruits that he was depicting. But there's also sort of show the actual lifelike essence of them. So there's always the potential for growth in these pictures. Especially in some of his, like this one, for example, and he's got a very I can't remember the exact name of it. So it's of the tree of life, or the, and it's it very much sort of has the essence of it's flowing forth with life and sprouting upwards to.
Can I just jump in here a second, because obviously Morris was interested in recreating these medieval artistic techniques, but why? And again, this is where the Ruskin ideas come into place, because Ruskin's saying the Industrial Revolution is turning us into machines of men. How do we counteract that? And Morris says we need to rediscover the past. We need to rediscover these ideas. And I think for me, why Morris is amazing was that he learned to hand weave, which hadn't there were no hand looms that in England. There was a time in the 18th century where everyone would have like a weaving loom in their loft. If you've ever been to the dentist Seaver's house in London, you'll see it. Those times were long gone. So he learned to hand weave. So this is him fighting the system by recreating the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Medievalism, the past, traditional methods of production. It was also a rejection of the style in Victorian homes at that time was often this kind of imported from France, this French opulent interior design, and he was totally against that. Totally.
I think as well, what we're seeing as well with this idea with Ruskin of the craftsman is both the designer and the person who makes the product. He's not just the designer and he's not just the producer. The whole process ought to be done by the one person or a group of people. And Morris is very much embracing that with going back to these medieval techniques in particular.
And that's very much why he wanted to recreate the guild structure and very much forward the guild, because the craftsman would have complete control of his materials, about his work, and about the actual what commissions he took on. And he was very much fully enthralled in the creative process from start to finish, as opposed to just one specific aspect of it, or completely being abstracted away from him, if you just say this is the manager himself.
Was this the piece you were referencing?
It might, yes. It looks very, yeah. I believe it was, yes. Although I think he had quite a few sort of tree tapestries like this. There was one recently at the William Morris Gallery in North London, which I was thinking of, which is very similar to this.
Just one thing to note is that despite all of his professions of medievalism and guildhood, he never created a guild. All of this was done through a business, Morris & Co. Now, one thing I want to point out is that Morris was a great designer, but he was an even better businessman. And I'll tell you why. Because it started out as Morris and like these three other guys, right? Within 5 years, he'd squeezed them out of the business and taken control. He'd basically like Facebooked, he Zuckerberged his co-partners at the beginning. See, no one tells you about this. About actually, he was a ruthless businessman,
and he was also able to expand into several different markets as well over sort of the next 10, 20 years. Starting when he kicked them out, they were mainly focusing on stained glass. And then in 1775, when he took over the company, they started focusing on dyeing, doing different printed products and woven fabrics. And then 2 years later, they began weaving tapestries, and 2 years after that, weaving carpets and rugs. And then 2 years after that, opening Merton Abbey. Quite the expansion in a short period.
Yeah.
Just quickly, sorry, Charlotte, just before you come in, 2 things I want to say as well is that number one, it wasn't just him doing the designs. He would do some of the wallpapers, but Burne-Jones was a key contributor, and again, he's
Yeah,
Lo-
and
lo-
William Jarrell as well, who took over when Morris died. William Jarrell did a lot of designs, and often many designs that we associate with Morris were actually by Jarrell.
Yeah, all under this the Morris & Co tag. You've got some of the PRB guys as well. So like Rossetti did a series of medieval. Some of Rossetti's best work are the Morris & Co stained glass. But the other thing I want to say is, like, who's buying this stuff, right? This is what you got to remember, because this is where I think like ideas of the like the world spirit or whatever. I don't want to get too Evolarian here, but it wasn't just like Ruskin forcing this and then like the consumers happened, but it was lightning was striking, because at the same time the middle class was born. Yeah, that's a Burne-Jones. You can tell instantly from like the faces and the colours. But I'll tell you who's buying it. Number one, because of the church revival I mentioned at the beginning, the coffers were rising, let's just say, and there was a huge interest in renovating churches. You know, a lot of churches had their windows smashed out. They were in a very bad state of repair during the Georgian period, especially Gothic churches. So fundamentally, Morris & Co was sort of leeching off the back of the Christian revival that was going on. Number two was this kind of huge growth in the middle class that I talked, especially in the north. When you see where all the best PRB paintings are, it's all in the north. It's all the mill owners. It's all of the this new the bourgeoisie swelling up. You know, so there's something weirdly middle class about Morris & Co as well, because it's kind of like people are trying. All of the rich aristos, they're still buying that French. That kind of the Napoleonic style, the bull wear, the gilded stuff. You know, if you're a manager at a mill, you know, you can't afford that. But you know what you can afford? A Morris chair. So there's something kind of like this. He's kind of like creating a new middle ground in the marketplace.
Unfortunately, he also very much was quite irritated by the market for his products. I have a quote. So he commented that he was ministering to this swinish luxury of the rich.
I mean,
he was really compromised. I mean, he was compromised in that. Of course, he was compromised in his marriage as well. I don't know how much we want to go into his biographical details, but yeah, he was quite a compromised person in that sense. That his means of production meant that it was often only middle class and upper middle class people who could afford the beautiful goods that he made, which was a shame.
And in my mind, I think this is, I was mentioning about what's the conclusion of Ruskin and Morris. Morris ultimately failed to rail against the machine because of this. He ended up becoming basically like what we'd call today a boutique designer, fashionable. That's the worst thing you want to be, is fashionable, because it's for a certain time. And what happens is, all of a sudden one day you don't become fashionable anymore, and it moves on. And you basically see that by the 1890s, the rise of English modern styles, like basically Liberty, and the Silver Studio and stuff like that, like heavily inspired by Morris, but also kind of changing things. And the fact is that his goods were more expensive than mass-produced items, sometimes massively, and they weren't the super high end of luxury. They were this middle ground, and so they did suffer at the same time. I think so. That's where I feel like both Ruskin's attempt to create the guild and Morrison's kind of like return to tradition through items, through technology, wasn't ultimately a failure, because they just weren't able to fight in that marketplace for a long period of time. I mean, they were buoyed up by the designers and that kind of wave and spirit that happened. But basically, as soon as Morris died, I would say that his kind of appeal massively declined.
He actually makes a series of points on this to do with his kind of socialist campaigning, and one of his points is that the fact that you can underpay quality work, or you can mass produce something which isn't as of good quality or as beautiful as the products that he's making, you can produce it so that it's cheaper, means that more beautiful things won't be bought by the public. And so his suggestion is to have a fixed rate for various products. And so the higher quality products or the more beautiful products will necessarily be bought. So in his view, the very nature of the laissez-faire economy allows for this sort of situation to occur, where he's a boutique designer rather than producing something for mass consumption.
Yeah, I'm personally not convinced about this. I mean, where do you end up with this? You basically end up with Lenin's command economy, essentially, and you're also relying on whoever's at the top to have taste. I think that's the other thing that Morris would forget. Lenin carried out his dream and mapped out an economy pegged at certain prices, but he didn't give. He was a utilitarian ultimately, so his work would never be selected. I think ultimately it's a question that hasn't been answered yet and still won't be. But Ruskin I think the closest I've seen it is Ruskin's discourses in Traffic, where he's talking about political economy or economics. It's all focused on about how we acquire money, basically, like how can we get more money. But it never talks about how should we spend it. And I think that's a really interesting idea. For me, it's fundamentally about teaching people how to spend money. And this is why I'm so obsessed with Dino's on my Twitter account. For those who don't know, Dino's kind of like a jocular meme talking about the stereotype of the newly moneyed working class. And in my mind, what's interesting is these are people that, again, 3 generations ago would be living in the East End of London, I know, selling cabbages out of a mobile grocer's unit or something like that. And now they're homeowners, they own Range Rovers, etc. They own designer gear. But these are people that they've got more money than any of their ancestors had for a long time. And what do they choose to spend it on? Just total rubbish, basically. Designer tat, like totally tasteless stuff. And so I think ultimately it's about returning to Ruskin's patriarchal state, is how I would call it. He would have gentlemen be taught to like good things, and then they will spend on good things, while Morris will have the state dictate that you will buy things for a certain price.
I would actually push back on that point, strictly about Morris. In one of his comments, I think it might be The Relations of Art to Labour, he specifically points to the fact we need to effectively raise up the working class by giving them taste. Otherwise, they will turn into brutes and be even more debased than they currently are.
Well, and again, this is sort of where I guess kind of Ruskin and Morris diverge. Ruskin, being basically an old school high Tory, believes in there's just 2 types of people. He doesn't believe in the class system.
Indeed.
He doesn't believe in a materialist class system. He believes that there are gentlemen and non-gentlemen, and that if you raise someone up, they become a gentleman. So the whole idea of raising someone up is itself a transformatory process for class. Again, this is in the beginning part of Traffic as well. What class is? Class isn't about how rich you are, but it's about what you like. And again, I think that's a really interesting thing. And again, this is why I think that the Dino thing's important. Dinos have shown that the class system just doesn't make any sense, because if we've given the proles, we've given the working class cash, and without guidance, they've just spent it on random stuff. So Ruskin doesn't believe you can transform everyone. While Morris, again, because he's an egalitarian materialist, thinks that everyone is equal and everyone has the ability to reach the status of gentleman or the higher levels of society.
Although Morris does still recognise the space for creative genius, and that there will only be a select few men who are actually truly capable of great artistic creation in any age. So that's at least one point where Morris does appear less egalitarian.
Well, yeah, I mean, his socialism wasn't a defined thing by that point, and if you think like
he's very much, he was very much part of the one of the foremost men who were actually able to popularise socialism to Britain in the late 19th century.
Yeah, and of course, what I love is if you see the 1910 reading list for British Labour, it's the Bible number 1, like Carlyle number 3, Ruskin number 5. It was like the most based reading list of all time. I'm just like, please return to 1910 Labour, basically.
Return to true Labour.
Yeah.
True Labour. Yeah, I'm wondering though if there's a tension here in Ruskin's ideas more broadly then, and perhaps Morris's, because I totally acknowledge on the consumer level, it's about taste, and men of, gentlemen of having the right taste is going to be necessary. But in Ruskin's view, the best sorts of the best way to produce beautiful products is to have craftsmen implementing their own designs. And if most craftsmen do not belong to this gentlemanly class, then how will they have the ability or the taste to produce beautiful things? This is a problem I see with Morris as well.
Yeah,
No,
definitely.
I think he would say that all craftsmen are ultimately gentlemen. Again, his ideas of what a gentleman is much broader than at the time. Again, you got to decouple it from the kind of snobby Victorian society, and it's kind of like more of, again, this sounds super cheesy, more like a state of mind and a state of being, and an interest and a love for arts and understanding, basically. So I think you're right to a degree. I think Ruskin does ask a lot of questions that he then is not able. He identifies problems, but that doesn't necessarily come up with solutions that work. And again, goes back to that Gilda St George. I mean, that example is interesting because he provided land, a substantial amount of cash, organized a group of people. I mean, they are still around today, and what they sort of do is like craft demos for hobbyists and some pretty good Ruskin lecture recreations, which actually are quite good, actually. So I do tune in occasionally. But have they managed to create anything artistically significant in the last 90 years? And the answer is no. So, I mean, my personal viewpoint is that, well, okay, I am not a returner. I do like the medieval period, but I think we have to ultimately understand that time is gone. And the reason why is that even if, say, for example, we all got like absolutely nuked tomorrow, elements of technology would remain, meaning that we could never return back to the medieval state, basically. Like, I think that's where I think AA's idea of, again, that postmodern modernist or whatever, postmodern traditionalist, actually, for me, does ring true. Modernity has happened. Things have happened, and we have to like deal with those factors. I think on regards to technology, this is sort of I did do a talk on this at the event that Plantagenet organised like a while ago. I think the issue is that we see technology as this homogenous, unique thing, while I see it as a very fractured cluster. So, for example, there are certain technologies which can improve the efficiency of processes, but there's certain technologies and techniques which give us new aesthetic opportunities. So, say, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the process of enameling at all. This is the process of grinding up glass, heating it in the furnace for a certain temperature, and it turns into this. You can like add like this beautiful glass to metal, basically. Now, where did that process come from? it hasn't been around. I mean, it's been around only since the Roman times. It's a new technology that was created, which opened up new aesthetic possibilities and boundaries at the same time. It didn't make things cheaper. It didn't make things faster to produce. If anything, it's a new it's delaying things. So how about this? In my mind, not all technology is bad. And again, like Morris is a bit of a hypocrite in some ways, I find as well, because he says, okay, yeah, technology is bad, but I'm still going to use the loom. Was like, okay, if you're going to return to the medieval loom, why don't you return to the Greek vertical loom? You know, one which is awful. If you've ever tried, I'm interested heavily in weaving and textiles. Those things are just insane to use. You have to like very, very, very uncomfortable. It takes forever to make stuff.
He was just totally compromised. Full stop. He wasn't against the machine, but he wanted factories to reorganize as small scale cooperatives that would just make these beautiful or useful things, and it's all just idealistic in some ways, given the age that he was in.
Morris, I'm sorry.
Compromised individual. I just always think of the word compromise when I think of him, particularly in his marriage.
He does actually draw the distinction that technology and new innovations can be moved or used when they can effectively save time and save labor without that harming the end product and the actual creative process behind it. Which I think certainly does hold true to the extent that
no. I totally disagree with this. You see, very, very much, and any efficient technology is going to lead you down the garden path, right? I'll tell you. So, for example, right, anyone who knows about woodworking, right? There's different types of saws. You've got like a hand saw and a power saw, right? What you can do on a hand saw is infinitely more flexible than what you can do with a power saw, right? Because the power saw, it's fixed. It has you can only do cuts in a certain kind of way, basically. But with a tenon saw, you can cut from any kind of angle. You can do lots of additional tricks, etc. So what you're doing is you're compromising your aesthetic ability to be able to cut things faster, and it's very like there are occasionally technologies which improve efficiency and give you more aesthetic opportunities, but they're very rare, and more often than not you're having to compromise. You're having to go down a certain path. And again, we can see this today with building design. While CAD has been a boon for architects to draw plans, it has then basically made everything very similar because the technology steers you. You know, it has a weight, it has a spirit behind it that guides the hand of the architect, because you're going to use the user interface in a certain way. You're going to rely on squares more rather than curves. You're not going to do ornaments because it requires more processing power for your computer to handle it, etc. So I very much believe that like this is what Morris is just consistently wrong about his approach to technology, where he just arbitrarily decides, oh, this is where this is the okay technology to use and this is the not okay technology to use, and then says, but actually if we improve efficiency, again, he's just like a rank utilitarian materialist. But by the end, he does go through different phases. You know, he starts sweet Morris of the 50s, 1850 Morris is like my favorite. That sweet summer child who was just happy and free, and just him and Burne Jones, and they you know, they fall apart as well. They don't hang out as much. And I think of the two, Burne Jones has by far the greater legacy, in my opinion, and his style evolves massively as he gets older, while Morris's powers diminish as he grows old. Morris produces all of his best work within a 10-year period in like 1860 to 1870, and again, like Charlotte said, or it's other designers coming in and doing other stuff.
Yeah. And, you know, those were the good old days for Morris. I mean, after 1865, he gets more heavily into poetry, of course, and goes to Iceland. And he translates some of the great Icelandic sagas for the first time, writes poetry, and gets more involved in socialism. So I always see him from that point, from about 1870 on, almost drifting away from Morris and Co. and going off into socialism.
He very much get stepped away from the company and actually
He did.
yeah,
Really.
and it devolved power to various different individuals who focused on the
Yeah,
actual
I mean,
management,
I
production.
recently did. Yeah, I recently did that video on his work, and as you get into the later pieces, it's all Daryl or May Morris, his daughter, who took over the embroidery wing of the company, and he himself becomes less and less involved as a designer, and other people start to take over.
And during that period, his sort of political activities were quite
Yeah.
great. I mean, he was traveling
yeah.
across Britain, writing speeches, writing poetry, trying to
Yeah.
motivate sentiment, and
He
really
would-
step back from
That's right. He would
company.
give public lectures every week. He was really, really involved. Yeah, he published the journal each week.
I'm just going to criticize Morris some more here. Other reasons why I don't like Morris ultimately is that he doesn't come up with a single like new or interesting idea himself. So, like I say, I often see Morris as this totem of putting Ruskin into practice in real life, and I think he's very successful at that in those early years. But when he starts to get into the socialist side, he just has like he just has nothing original or interesting to say. Like if one of his works is News from Nowhere, for example, where it's this story about like this guy who gets transported back to this kind of mythical utopia. I mean, that is an awful book, man. That's
It's a ridiculous book. Ridiculous. It's the sort of thing that an A-level politics student might knock up. It's awful.
I literally unbelievably cringe. And again, like ideas of free love and stuff like that. I mean, I don't want to muck rake on Morris. I want to approach his ideas, but it is worth mentioning about his fetid relationship, as we've got the Rossetti up here.
Well, the problem with not believing in property and marriage means that you really can't say very much when your wife goes off with another man. Compromised again. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Rossetti goes off with his wife. She's obsessed with May Morris, and they end up they end up sort of having like living together in the same house. He's the original cuckold, basically. He's the original socialist cuck, basically. Also, I'm amazed it happened because Rossetti's super handsome when he's younger, but then just like his opium addiction,
he staggeringly lost his looks. He was a really good-looking guy when he was younger, but it really went.
Some people talk about the wall for women, but Rossetti hit the wall unbelievably hard. Basically, poor guy.
Yeah, too much Lord in him. Yeah, not good.
I think the one thing I would defend Morris on here, and this includes News from Nowhere, which incidentally was so laughably utopian that H.G. Wells' The Time Machine is a direct criticism of it, and Wells was, he was certainly a progressive, but I think Morris, perhaps more plainly in some ways than Carlyle and Ruskin, to my mind, puts forward the idea that work has integral value. Because in News from Nowhere, all the needs of the people are met, but he still believes that actually it's not just about meeting our needs. Work has to have a value. It has to raise us up in some way or another. And part of the problem is that we've ignored the fact that labor has an impact upon the human soul or the human body and mind. And that the kinds of work that are happening in the industrial era where men and women are treated as cogs in a machine is degrading and painful to the soul and body. And so Morris is really drawing attention to that idea that actually, no, we should be engaged in, as human beings, in labor, which is fulfilling for us. And okay, it's maybe not an original idea. Carlyle very much is on that stream, but Morris is trying to bring that into all the things that he does and into his literary work as well.
But then he's literally a victim of his own ideology, because when you go down that socialist materialist utopian utilitarian, I should say, mindset, you're not going to be able to, like, work loses its transcendent quality, and I feel Morris is constantly trapped between the shadow of his former self and his new socialist views, where and again it takes 10 years for the socialists to lose all of those kind of feelings. And those 1910 Labour guys, within 30 years, compare them to Attlee. It's a totally different generation, and it's there is a power of logic that dissolves all of Morris's fanciful ideas. The idea of the value of work as a transcendent idea is a spiritual one and a Christian one on that as well. And because he's decoupled from that, the value of work, again, it's interesting. If you you see all the socialists today on Reddit or whatever, they're like the anti-work people or whatever. They hate work, whatever. It's fascinating in my mind. That it's their goal is to produce a society where no one works anymore, and it's like, yeah. So he's a man torn between his past and whatever the present that he's in. Sorry, Plantagenet, you were going to say something.
I actually can't recall what I was going to say now.
Okay. One last thing I wanted to say in terms of just like the influence of Morris. So obviously his store was like a medium success, right? But he basically pioneered an entire artistic style by himself, and again from the 50s to the 60s, it was pretty big. That's the first wave of the arts and crafts. However, what he did was to inspire another generation of artists, and you've got the official launch. When we talk about arts and crafts, it's based off the Arts and Crafts exhibition formed in I think it's 82 is the first one by Walter Crane. Actually, Morris is not involved in the quote unquote actual arts and crafts movement, but he is effectively the paternal father because all of those guys who are there are influenced by his thinking. So Morris influences that group. You've got names like C.S. Voysey are part of that. Like the Arts and Crafts exhibition is fundamentally important for the design styles of the next 20 years of English art as well. Not just arts and crafts, but also from the new sculpture guys are involved. You've got interiors and architectures involved. This whole, if you see kind of late Victorian Tudor-Beathan revivalism, that all comes off the back of Morris as well. So he does set in motion several things that have huge resounding impacts for the whole of England and our design culture until I would say the First World War. And the First World War, like both Ruskin and Morris get more craftsmen in the marketplace. There are more they're all high end and luxury, but there are more of these kind of boutique style designers by 1910 than there were during the Georgian period, I think, from what I've seen. But what happens with World War One? You have a generation of young men annihilated and destroyed, and essentially all of that craft skill is wiped out overnight. The arts and crafts movement dies, I think, because of the First World War and its implications. So
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe one last thing to say. Morris has a revival though in the 70s. Interestingly, and again, I was born in the 80s, so this is only from second hand from seeing it, etc. But there is this kind of revival of both the PRB movement. So, for example, I don't know if you know, but the one of the biggest collectors was Lloyd Webber, for example, whatever his name is.
Yeah, he has a fantastic private collection. If only we could all be that wealthy. Yeah,
exactly. But also Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin. Yeah. He owns George Burgess's house, who's another famous arts and crafts designer, for example. So actually, there's loads of these figures from the 70s that were heavily influenced. You've got Rick Wakeman doing his King Arthur album, and his King Arthur on Ice. A lot of this kind of 70s medievalism and folk revival is inspired by the arts and crafts and this kind of neo-Victorianism. And there's even, I got to be honest, some of the worst colorways I've ever seen in my life of Morris prints in the 70s, basically. Have you ever seen these, Charlotte? These kind of like bright purple. I'll see if I can send a link. Hold on.
I have, and of course Laura Ashley borrowed hugely from Morris. Laura Ashley was the interior designer of the 1970s. You could have your entire house kitted out with Ashley. You could wear her clothes. I have a picture of an aunt of mine standing in a Laura Ashley dress, and behind her is Laura Ashley wallpaper in the same pattern, and she literally has disappeared into that picture. So yeah, Laura Ashley stole massively from Morris. Yeah.
Well, and you also have, and I noticed Justine Brown's bookshelf as you know, as mentioned in the 70s, you know, Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin and others were getting into Tolkien. And
Yeah.
of course, Tolkien was heavily influenced by William Morris's fantasy writings and his translations of Norse sagas. We probably don't get Tolkien in quite the same way if Morris hadn't translated those texts, because that's what he was growing up with as a child. And I think as well, he's influencing H.G. Wells. So he's got a. It's not just on the artistic side, on the literary side, he's a huge factor for science fiction and for fantasy and for the revitalization of mythology, which is it's an amazing legacy to leave behind. If you're just on one of those things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Morris died at 62 at home, and the doctor said that his cause of death was simply being William Morris and having done more work in his life than 10 men.
It's
died
true.
from being ill.
He was an exceptionally hard worker. I would give him that. I just there is another path for Morris where he retained his Christianity and shooed away the satanic socialism that he followed, and I genuinely think he would have been the greatest artist that Britain ever had. But he just wasted all those years, wasted the best time, like all of that time where he could be designing and putting and doing what he is good at, rather than just stupid committee meetings. He gets kicked out of his own committee meetings later on. It's so tragic.
Well, quite unfortunately, whilst at Oxford, him and Rossetti almost actually wanted to become monks and live in a Catholic monastery. But unfortunately, they didn't go through with it in the end.
He did set up. Sorry, I was just going to say, he did set up the Society for the Preservation of Ancient Buildings. So he was aware that there was Gothic architecture all around him in England at that time that was under attack. So he did do.
Yeah,
that was a good thing he did.
Yes, like the National Trust and English Heritage, you could say, are Morris derived as well.
Yeah.
So that is another important good. Can I just talk about Morris today, Nathan, or is there anything you wanted to talk about before?
No, that sounds good, and then we can kind of get towards wrapping up. Yeah.
Okay. I hate what's happened to Morris today, and if we were to raise him up from the grave and see what's happened to his beloved business, I think his head would genuinely explode. He would have a second death instantly. There has been, I would say, a revival of Morris in the last 20 years because he's made it as part of that modern design canon, and especially with our kind of focus on individualism through interior design. I think there's been a big Morris revival in two ways. Firstly, the Morris & Co brand has been kind of again brought back again. It's owned by a third-party company, but you can actually today still buy hand-printed Morris wallpapers from the original blocks, and I think that's pretty cool. And they still hand-print them today. So
you can indeed by Sanderson.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're £150 per square meter. So again, it's even more. It's even more luxury than it was during Morris's time. In fact, that's possibly one of the most expensive wallpapers in the marketplace. There has, however, been a deluge of what I would call Morris tat. So I want to quickly rant about this. For example, H&M ran a Morris & Co print range recently, and okay, you got to understand that these patterns are always created for a context, right? For Morris, most of them are like a wallpaper or for a jacquard weave, something like that, right? What they're not made for is a flipping butter. What do you call them? The butter storers. I forgot
A
the
butter
name.
dish.
Yeah,
The
butter dish. AA's cursed butter dish with the Morris print. He
Mm.
would have absolutely hated that, because if you, Nathan, I don't know if you can bring up the butter dish. If you just Google, if you just type in Morris & Co. butter dish, strawberry thief is the.
There's
the
now
print.
unfortunately also sort of water bottles, pencil cases.
Everywhere,
Whenever you go to sort of William
everywhere.
Morris Gallery or the
Yeah.
Society
He would have-
building,
He,
there's
he
always
was,
use
yeah,
this.
spinning in his grave.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we're just, unsurprisingly, we are just like rehashing the corpse of a oh my goodness, look at this, right? So this design, okay, was originally for a wallpaper. It's been shrunk down, so you can't see any of the detail whatsoever. Then they've added this rank colorways as well. So the colorways is like the color pattern, the color palette that you use as part of it. I'm pretty sure if you see on the bottom, there's like a red and green, more red and green one. It's about midway down on the bottom there. That I'm pretty sure this is AA's butter dish that he owns. But it has some kind of like intrinsic, like middle class sensibility thing to it at the same time, if that makes sense. I feel like having a Morris & Co. wallpaper gives you like middle class cred points. So it's just become this like totally bourgeois, totally unintellectual thing, super bore. Like I just find this just disgusting, quite frankly. There is no craft and no beauty and no art in this piece. And yeah, it's a shame. It's the end of a very, very strong legacy, you know. So
Well, then what have we been talking about for both Ruskin and Morris? It's about the ingenuity of each artist and each craftsman producing new designs and developing ideas. This is just rehashing what somebody else has done. It's against the very spirit of what Morris was campaigning for.
yeah, exactly.
So I think we've had a really fulsome discussion, and there's so much that people in the audience could go and explore for themselves. What I want to ask each of you to do is maybe just as a way of kind of rounding off, maybe just kind of explaining, in your view, what maybe a single key idea or point you would want people to take away from Ruskin or Morris. So let's start with Plantagenet.
I think for me at least, the key point is that they both very much want to reflect higher truths about the world, about their culture, and well, at least not in Morris's case, only in Ruskin's case, about God. And it's very moving to view their art, because it does have a deep effect upon the senses that we're very much robbed by when you view modern art and architecture. So it's very important in that respect.
And Ferro.
For me, Ruskin is this great forgotten hero of philosophy. A man that didn't fit in his age, and he doesn't fit in ours, but someone who can guide us to a newer, transcendent future.
And finally, but not least, Lady of Shalott.
Okay, I would say that Morris and Ruskin both were linked by a common feeling for the natural world, and a common feeling for the natural world, a belief that people should be fulfilled by their work and not destroyed by it. And I think that's something that is more relevant now, probably even with the rise of AI, where human beings are being replaced by machines physically. It's more important now maybe than ever, and obviously a revulsion for industrialization. Nature and God will prevail, and I think when I look at the world around me, I think many of us are so far away from the lives that we should be living, and what Morris and Ruskin were pointing out 150 years ago is just as relevant now. And it was the anniversary in 200th anniversary of Ruskin's birth in 2019, and it barely got a mention. Yet in 1919 there were huge. It was the centenary of his birth, and there was huge discussion about his ideas. Now But I guess maybe art critics just don't have that impact now. We live in a world of 5-minute celebrity, so it's not going to be remembered in the same way. But yeah, I think that's what I take away from it: God and nature, and they will always prevail.
Well, thank you all three. There's very little I could add to what you've said. You've beautifully expressed many of the key ideas in Ruskin and Morris. And I suppose the only thing I would add is that there's a temptation to constantly think that the problems we face are new problems, that everything that's happening is happening for the first time. We see that on the progressive side, right? They think, all their ideas are new, that they're forging a new world and a new society. But it can also take place for those who are against it, that we're encountering very new realities. And in some ways we are. But on the other hand, many of the values at stake were also at stake when Ruskin and Morris were engaging with Victorian industrialization and commercialization. And so there's a lot to draw from these thinkers and their ideas and their practices for reflecting on how we can engage today in this struggle. Just the one super chat today. Alice Liddell, 1872, for £2. Thank you very much. Thanks reading Paradise Lost in Anakin stream. That was the stream last week, but you're very welcome. I always enjoy reading Paradise Lost. There's so much richness there, and maybe one day we'll need to have a stream on that. Before we go, I would like to give everybody an opportunity to promote anything you would like to promote. So, Plantagenet, is there anything you would like to draw people's attention to regarding your own work?
Well, foremost would be check out Skildings. Secondly, I'm working on a few sort of short video essays on the reign of the Confessor, the regicides, i.e. the men who killed Charles I, looking at some of various historical data and evidence to sort of piece out the historical truth to these events, which many people talk about but aren't really actually investigated enough. That's about it on my behalf.
Fantastic, and everybody should check out Shieldings. It's doing great work, and it's bringing so many creative people and intellectual people together. If you're looking for it to translate into in real life, this online community, they're doing it. So really do that. Lady of Shalott, anything you would like to promote?
Oh, just as I mentioned earlier in the chat, I posted a video on Morris. I've visited the Gallery of South Australia quite recently, that holds the largest collection of Morris's work outside of Britain. Took some photographs, had to talk about that. I'm going to try and get into a schedule of actually posting videos regularly, but it's all baby steps for me at the moment. So it's been a big learning curve making videos. It looks a lot easier than what it actually is. It's interesting you're talking about Shieldings, because I was contacted to look into the possibility of hosting a Shieldings down here in Australia, and that's something that we would like to do at some point. And I'm going to try to attend the event in the UK in August, to tie that into visiting relatives back home in the UK. So so just try and do some things in real life, and that would be good. But yeah, I'll just try and work on my next video, and I would like to do a bit more on Morris, maybe some biographical work. He was a compromised person. I love him. I think he had a good heart.
Well, that would be amazing if something could happen in Australia, and people should check out your channel, because especially the William Morris video. I think people should go after this, and it's not too long. Go and give it a watch.
No, it's short. Yeah.
And Ferro, anything you would like to promote?
I think I'm due to jump on Deepest Law in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll be talking about the beauty of books. I've been working on this for a long time, trying to pull some interesting manuscripts together. And of course, one thing I've realised, we didn't even talk about the Kelmscott Press, Morris's private press, but you'll have to wait for the book stream, and I'll be sure to include some Morris as part of that. So
fantastic. On my end, there is no stream on Tuesday. It's Valentine's Day. Go out on a date. Go and read some some romantic poetry and look at some pre-Raphaelite paintings. You don't want to be watching my streams on Valentine's Day. But the week after, we will have a relevant topic. It's going to be the dangerous power of Eros, the charged and passionate and almost madness that's been seen in mythologies and legends, and how true love can disrupt whole societies and even the moral order. And then after that, the following week, we've got English Restoration again. And we're going to be looking at the chocolate industry and its emergence in 19th century Victorian England. And I think this is a really interesting connection. The development of Cadbury's and its factory at Bourneville, and how the Cadburys were actually influenced by Ruskin quite heavily in the formation of this. But whereas, Morris is trying to return to the past and, this very small enterprises, this is an example of on an industrial scale, trying to incorporate some of these ideas. And so maybe a different perspective, maybe perhaps a more viable perspective. We'll see. But that's what we'll be doing in a couple of weeks, which should be good fun.
Excellent.
Yeah. So all that remains for me to say is thank you so much to Pharaoh, Lady of Shalott, and Plantagenet.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Really loved it. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll be able to do something again in the future. In the meantime, everybody, thank you for watching. And I hope whoever you are, wherever you are, God bless you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.